The alarm didn't scream. It pulsed, low and steady like a heartbeat that had forgotten how to hurry. On the radar screen inside the USS Sentinel's Combat Information Center, a single white dot moved across the blue dark of the Pacific with the kind of purpose that made the young petty officer at the console sit up straight and reach for his headset without being told. The dot had no transponder code, no filed route, no military beacon, just a steady, unhurried line cutting through restricted airspace like it belonged there, like it had always belonged there. Air boss! The petty officer's voice was controlled but thin. Unknown contact, bearing 270, range 42 miles. Civilian transponder only, not responding to hails. Commander Harold Fitch was a man who had seen enough aerial alerts to sort them by type before finishing his coffee. He set the mug down, looked at the screen, looked at the approach vector. He didn't pick the mug back up. Scramble the alert fighters. From the Sentinel's deck, two F-22 Raptors rose into the morning with a sound like the sky being torn open. They climbed hard and banked west engines howling into the gray Pacific dawn. Beneath them, the fleet adjusted. Weapon systems came online. Tracking stations locked bearing. In rooms below the waterline, men who had been eating breakfast pushed their trays aside and moved to their stations without a word. The Sentinel had done this before. Dozens of times. Unidentified aircraft drifting too close. Confused civilian pilots. Occasional provocations from state actors with something to prove. The protocol was clean and rehearsed. Identify, warn, escort out. Let the Coast Guard handle the paperwork. No one on that ship in that moment believed this contact was any different. They were wrong in a way that none of them had the clearance to fully understand. Her name was Clara Mathis, 43 years old. Former Commander, United States Navy. She had stopped counting the years since she had officially existed on paper. The L-39 Albatross she flew was small and old and entirely unremarkable from the outside. Civilian registration. Repainted twice. The kind of aircraft that blended into the background of any small airfield, the kind no one photographed or remembered. But inside, beneath the panels and behind the displays, it was something else. Modified avionics, custom comm suite, equipment that did not appear in any civilian catalog. She had built most of it herself in a hangar in Nevada that officially housed agricultural equipment. Clara sat in the cockpit with the quiet of someone who had made peace with altitude long ago. Through the canopy, the Pacific stretched in every direction, silver and vast, the morning light still low and scattered. The ocean at this hour looked like hammered metal. Cold, indifferent. She had always loved it for that. On her head was a flight helmet, standard issue in its shape, worn to the bone, in the way that only years of use could produce. The exterior was scuffed. One of the chin strap buckles had been replaced with a different model, incompatible in color, but functional. If you had been standing close enough in the right light to see inside the lining, you would have seen a name written there in black permanent marker and handwriting that was not Clara's. Small letters. Careful. The kind a person writes when they want something to last. M. Vane. She had not written that name. She had not needed to. The helmet had come to her already marked, handed over on a flight deck, very much like the one she was now approaching on a morning, very much like this one 5 years and several lifetimes ago. She had not changed it. She had not removed the name. Every flight she had flown since that morning, in places that did not appear on declassified maps, she had worn someone else's name above her own eyes. It was the closest thing she had to a ritual. She reached for the throttle with her right hand and held it at cruise power. The hand was steady enough. It was almost always steady enough. The mornings were the worst. Something about the cold at altitude, something about the specific angle of early light on the instruments made the right hand want to negotiate instead of simply perform. She had been managing that negotiation for 2 years now, quietly, the way pilots manage the things they are not ready to report, which is to say carefully and alone, and with the specific competence of someone who understands exactly how much runway they have left. This morning the hand held. She kept her course. She heard the fighters before she saw them. 2 bright points of geometry cutting toward her from the east, climbing fast and leveling into intercept position with textbook precision. She watched them come and felt something that was not quite pride, but lived in the same neighborhood. They were good. The formation was clean. The approach angle minimized her reaction window while keeping them out of each other's line of fire. Whoever had trained these pilots had taught them correctly. She let them come. She did not alter her course. In the lead F-22, Lieutenant Declan Marsh ran through his checklist with the automatic efficiency of a man who had done this enough times that his hands knew the sequence before his mind finished the thought. 6 years of flight, 3 deployments, dozens of intercepts. He had escorted drunk charter pilots back towards civilian airspace, shadowed reconnaissance drones operating on ambiguous legal ground, and once spent 40 minutes convincing a retired Air Force colonel in a Cessna that the carrier battle group he was attempting to photograph was not in fact a tourist attraction. This felt different. He could not have explained why, precisely. The contact was small, a light jet probably. Civilian markings. Nothing about its profile suggested capability, but the line it was flying, he kept coming back to that. He had pulled it up 3 times since his scramble, and each time it told him the same thing. No hesitation, no drift, no minor corrections that every pilot makes when navigating over open water with nothing but instruments and habit. The line was straight the way a ruled edge is straight, the way a person draws a line when they already know exactly where the endpoint is. Callum. He came up on the private channel to his wingman, Lieutenant Bryce Callum, holding formation off his right. Go ahead. You're looking at the same approach vector I am. A pause. I'm looking at it. What does it tell you? Another pause, longer this time. Tells me whoever this is, they're not lost. Declan nodded inside his helmet. No, they're not. He switched to the open channel. His voice came out steady and clear, the way they trained you to speak, when people's lives were balanced on the tone of your words. Unidentified aircraft, this is Navy Flight Raptor 1. You are entering restricted airspace. Identify yourself and adjust course to heading 270 immediately. The radio returned silence. The white dot on his radar kept moving. Straight line. No correction. In the Sentinel's flag bridge, Admiral Warren Slade stood with his hands behind his back and looked out at the Pacific the way a man looks at something he has been waiting to see for a long time. He was 57 years old, lean in the way of men who forget to eat when they are thinking. Gray at the temples, not by genetics, but by the specific kind of pressure that accumulates at that rank over that many years. He had commanded destroyers, then carrier groups, then entire theater assets. He had spoken to presidents. He had made decisions that never appeared in any history and never would. He was by any measure a difficult man to surprise. His aide, a young lieutenant commander named Hess, had been standing at respectful distance for 4 minutes, waiting to be addressed when Slade finally spoke. Get me the secure line to the Pentagon. Direct channel to General Porter's office. Hess moved. Slade didn't, because Warren Slade had known since 3 days ago that a small civilian jet would appear on his radar this morning with no transponder code and no flight plan and a straight-line approach vector that no lost pilot could produce. He had known who would be flying it. He had known what she was doing here and why, and what it had cost her to come back to this particular ship. He had told no one. Not Farr, not the air boss, not the crew. He had said nothing because he needed the response to be real. He had spent enough years watching drills produce perfect results that disappeared the moment the scenario became actual. He needed to know whether his fleet would recognize authority it could not see on paper. Authority that arrived with no warning, no announcement, no institutional scaffolding. He needed to know if they would hear it when it came. His secure line clicked live. He picked it up, listened, set it down. She's on approach, he said to no one in particular. Right on time. 96 hours earlier, in a conference room on the 4th floor of a building that did not appear in any public directory of Pentagon facilities, Clara Mathis had stood in front of a map. The map showed the Pacific Theater, 7 carrier battle groups rendered in clean blue geometry, patrol corridors, threat assessment overlays, the kind of operational picture that requires clearances most people in uniform will never hold. The general across the table slid a manila folder toward her without ceremony. 7 groups, he said. The audit covers all of them eventually. Standard rotation. You pick your starting point. Clara looked at the map. She looked at the 7 points. She did not take long. Her finger came down on the Sentinel's position without hesitation, without a flicker of internal debate visible on her face. Clean and certain the way she did everything. The general looked at where her finger had landed. Any particular reason? Unfinished business, she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once and moved on to the briefing parameters. He was a man who had learned not to ask Clara Mathis to elaborate when she used that tone. What he didn't know was that the Sentinel was the ship Marcus Vane had launched from on his last morning. The ship he had taken off from beside her into airspace they had no business entering with the orders they had been given and the backup they had not been provided. The ship his name was carved into on a wall she had not been back to see in 5 years. She had told herself for most of those 5 years that she was staying away for operational reasons. Clean separation. No trail. The work she was doing required distance from everything she had been before. She had believed that for a while. Then one evening in the Nevada hangar with the albatross half assembled around her and a coffee going cold on a workbench, she had picked up the helmet and looked at the name inside and understood that she was not staying away for operational reasons. She was staying away because going back meant standing in front of that wall. And standing in front of that wall meant admitting in a place where it could not be explained away as a mission parameter that she had carried Marcus Vane home in the only way available to her, and it had not been enough, and she had lived with that every day since, in the particular silence of people who do not speak about the things that have marked them most deeply. The audit was the reason, but the Sentinel was the destination. It had always been the destination. She had just needed the right set of orders to give herself permission. Unidentified aircraft, this is your second warning. Declan's voice came through with a harder edge, now calibrated and controlled, but carrying the weight of the clock. You have 60 seconds to comply. Adjust course to heading 270, or you will be considered a threat to this battle group. In the Combat Information Center, Fitch was running out of patience in the methodical way of experienced men. Not emotional, procedural. He had moved through the checklist. The contact had not responded. The contact had not altered course. By definition, this was a threat. Raptor 1, if she doesn't respond in 30 seconds, you are cleared to fire a warning shot across the bow. Callum's voice came back on the private channel. Marsh, you thinking what I'm thinking? Civilian with a death wish, Declan said. Either that or someone who genuinely doesn't care about the 60 seconds. Declan looked at the dot on his screen. Still moving, still straight, still not turning. There was something about the steadiness of it that sat wrong in his chest like a note played slightly off key that you couldn't identify until it stopped. He had been in this situation enough times to know how pilots under threat respond. They adjust. Even the ones trying to appear calm, they adjust. The hands move. The course shifts by a degree or two. The body's self-preservation instinct overrides the intention. This one wasn't adjusting. This one wasn't adjusting because this one was not afraid. He keyed the open channel one last time. Final warning, unidentified aircraft. You have 30 seconds to comply. This is not a simulation. Identify yourself and alter course now. The Pacific held its breath, and then the radio opened. The voice that came through it was not loud. It was not urgent. It carried no edge of fear, no performance of authority. It was simply present, the way a compass needle is present when it finds north. Not dramatic, not trying, just pointing. USS Sentinel, this is Ghost Viper. A pause. One beat. I'm coming home. Disarm your weapons. The silence that followed had physical weight. In the Combat Information Center, a coffee mug slipped from a petty officer's hand and hit the floor. Nobody moved to pick it up. The operator to his left had both hands suspended above his keyboard mid-keystroke and did not complete the motion. Fitch stood very still with his hand near the comms panel, not touching it. He was not a man who startled easily. He had 31 years of naval service. He did not trust his voice right now. In the F-22, Declan Marsh heard the words and felt something he had never felt in the cockpit before. A moment of complete cognitive arrest. Every trained response he had, every protocol and procedure and muscle memory honed over 6 years, simply stopped, like a machine cut from power. Did she just... Callum's voice came through barely above a murmur. Marsh, did she just say Ghost Viper? Declan did not answer immediately. He was looking at the approach vector again. The straight line, the absence of hesitation. The flight path drawn by someone who did not need to locate the carrier because they already knew with total precision where it was. Someone who had approached this carrier before, many times. She said Ghost Viper, he confirmed. His voice came out quieter than he intended. That's not real, Callum said. Marsh, that's a legend. That's a story the Top Gun instructors tell when they want to describe something that shouldn't be possible. Raptor 1. Admiral Slade's voice came through on the command channel, and every other sound on the frequency ceased instantly. Not because the Admiral had raised his voice, because he hadn't. He spoke with the specific quiet of a man who had been waiting for this moment and had prepared exactly what he would say. Cease all defensive posture. I repeat, power down all weapon systems directed at the inbound contact. Raptor flight, your orders have changed. You are now escort. Honor guard formation. The CIC absorbed this in silence. Fitch found his voice. Admiral, she's listed as a civilian contact. No military beacon, no Captain Fitch. A pause so slight it was nearly imperceptible. That aircraft is operating under clearance levels that are not visible in your system. Follow the order. Declan was already adjusting his formation. He pulled the F-22 back and out, repositioning from intercept posture to escort, matching the Albatross's speed and holding station off her left wing. Through his canopy, he could finally see her clearly, the small jet salt gray and worn at the edges, flying with the ease of something that had been doing this for a very long time. He keyed his radio. His voice came out with a formality he hadn't planned, something instinctive. Ghost Viper, this is Raptor 1. Your escort is in position. Welcome back. A beat of silence. Then her voice again. Same quality, same stillness. Good intercept, Raptor 1. Your approach vector was tight. Whoever trained you did it right. Declan said nothing for a moment, because something in the way she said it, the precision of it, the specific emphasis on approach vector, made him think she wasn't speaking in generalities. Made him think she knew exactly who had trained him and exactly how, and that she had been the source of at least some of what that training contained. Callum came through on the private channel voice, stripped of the earlier skepticism, carrying something Declan recognized as the same feeling he himself was trying to process. Marsh. Yeah, I think this is real. Yeah, Declan said. I think it is. On the Sentinel's deck, word moved faster than any official announcement could. By the time Clara's wheels touched the carrier deck and the arresting cable brought the Albatross to its abrupt, decisive stop, there were men and women 3 deep at the catwalks and railings, craning for a view of the small jet as its canopy rose. Chief Petty Officer Roscoe Tate stood at the edge of the group of younger sailors he had been working with since 0600. He was 51 years old, built like a man who had never stopped doing the physical work even after rank had given him the option to stop, and he had 22 years on carriers of one class or another. Ghost Viper, one of the younger sailors, said, not quite a question. Is that actually a real person? Tate looked at the jet, looked at the figure beginning to emerge from the cockpit. I was stationed at Lemoore when she was active, he said, keeping his voice low in the way of men who understand that some things sound different when they're spoken loudly. Watched her bring in an F-18 that had no hydraulics, no secondary power, and about 40% of its tail structure. Maintenance couldn't explain how it had stayed airborne long enough to reach the deck. He paused. I asked the crew chief afterward. He said he'd seen a lot of pilots. He said she was something else. Like what? Tate thought about it. Like someone who had made a deal with the physics, he said, and the physics had agreed. Captain Gideon Farr approached the jet at the head of a small honor guard, a protocol communicated from the flag bridge with a brevity that left no room for questions. Farr was a deliberate man, careful with his words and his authority, and the order had surprised him. But Slade's orders generally surprised him, and they generally turned out to have reasons that became clear in time. Clara dropped from the cockpit to the deck. She was not tall. She moved without ceremony, the helmet coming off in one practiced motion, tucking under her left arm. Her flight suit was plain. Her expression was the expression of someone who has been traveling for a long time and has finally reached the place they set out for and is allowing themselves for just a moment the simple fact of arrival. Farr stopped in front of her, extended his hand. Commander Mathis, welcome back aboard. The Admiral sends his regards. Captain Farr, she shook his hand once clean. Permission to walk my own approach to the Admiral. Granted, the crew has been informed you're conducting an audit of fleet readiness. Full access has been authorized. Thank you, she said it quietly. She was already looking past him at the ship. At the lines of it, the geometry, the particular way the light moved across steel at this hour on this ocean. She put the helmet back on her head, adjusted it once, and walked across the deck toward the island. Declan climbed down from his F-22 and stood for a moment watching her go. Callum came up beside him. Neither of them spoke right away. Around them, the quiet energy of a ship that had processed something it didn't fully understand was beginning. Ready rooms buzzing. Corridors carrying the weight of whispered names. She said the approach vectors was tight, Callum said finally. Yeah. And that whoever trained me did it right. Yeah. Callum was quiet for a moment. My instructor at Top Gun, Commander Vane. He talks about Ghost Vipers sometimes. Not by name, just as a reference, like a standard. Like at this level, this is what the edge looks like. He's paused. I always thought it was a teaching device. Something composite, built from several real people. Declan watched Clara Mathis disappear through a hatch in the island. Apparently not, he said. He thought about the approach vector. The straight line. the absolute absence of hesitation in a flight path that had covered 40 miles of open ocean directly into the most heavily defended airspace in the Pacific Fleet. He had been flying for 6 years. He had spent those years learning genuinely, learning from men who were excellent at this work. He had believed in the way that people believe things they haven't yet had reason to question, that he had a reasonably accurate picture of what the best low would like. He was recalibrating. His instructor at Top Gun had a name, Commander Elliot Vane, a man who taught with the specific intensity of someone who had a personal stake in whether his students survived. A man who had never in Declan's experience spoken easily about his past, who had once said after a late-night debrief with the lights low and the room nearly empty, that he had a brother who flew. Past tense. Declan had not asked. He thought about it now, and he didn't know why it felt connected. He just knew that it did. Above the Pacific, the morning light had burned through the last of the haze. The Sentinel moved through it steady and purposeful, carrying its 3,000 people and its history and its ghosts, and now once again the woman who flew under the name of one. Ghost Viper had come home. And the real work, the kind that doesn't appear in audit parameters, had not yet begun. The Sentinel had a particular smell below the flight deck. Every carrier did. Steel and hydraulic fluid and the specific salt water that worked its way into everything, no matter how many times the ventilation was cleaned. Clara had spent enough years on ships like this that the smell no longer registered as a smell. It registered as a location, as orientation. The body's way of saying, you are here, and here is a place you have been before. She followed Captain Farr through the island and down 2 levels, moving through the ship's interior with the ease of someone who does not need to read the deck markings to know where they are going. Farr noticed. He was a man who noticed things and had learned to keep those observations to himself until they became relevant. He filed it away. The tour was standard: Combat Information Center, air operations, the ready rooms, flight deck control. The places an auditor would need to see, the places that produced the data, that produced the assessments that eventually became the reports that informed the decisions made by people who would never stand on this deck. Clara walked through each of them with a quietness that the crew interpreted in different ways. Some took it for professionalism. Some took it for the particular gravity of the Pentagon's attention. A few of the older hands took it for something they could not name precisely, but recognized by instinct, the way you recognize a species of weather before it fully arrives. She asked clean questions. She made notes in a small field notebook with a pen that had seen better years. She did not perform the role of auditor. She simply was one, which is a different thing entirely. But she was also doing something else at the same time in the same moments with the same stillness. She was reading the ship, not its systems, its people. The way a corridor fills with slightly different energy when someone in authority passes through it. The way a crew's collective posture tells you whether they trust each other. The small calibrations of deference and ease that reveal to anyone trained to look the actual lines of command beneath the official ones. What she found on the Sentinel was a ship that worked, genuinely worked. Not in the performed way of units preparing for inspection, but in the actual way of people who had been doing this long enough and well enough that the performance and the reality had become the same thing. And she recognized with a precision that was almost uncomfortable why. It was in the radar integration. In the adaptive strike protocols layered into the CIC's response matrices. In the communications routing that cut alert time by a margin she had once calculated on a yellow legal pad in a different life. In the intercept approach, vectors that Declan Marsh had used this morning, which were not the standard vectors from the manual she had been trained on, but the modified version she had proposed in a memo she had written 7 years ago, in the margins of a simulation debrief, half convinced that no one would read it. Someone had read it. She kept walking. She kept her face arranged in the neutral expression of professional assessment. But in her chest, something had shifted that she had not anticipated. She had spent 5 years flying in places where her work produced outcomes but no evidence. Where success meant nothing changed, that you could see only things that did not happen that otherwise would have. She had grown accustomed to that. She had told herself in the Nevada hangar and in the borrowed rooms of forward operating locations that had no mailing addresses that the work was enough without the knowing. Walking through the Sentinel, she discovered that she had been partly wrong about that. There were worse things than being forgotten. But there were also things that being forgotten cost you that you didn't fully account for until you walked back into the room where your ideas had taken root without your name attached to them and found them alive and functional and better than you'd left them. She had not expected to feel this. She kept walking. The memorial wall was in a corridor off the main passageway on the second deck between the entrance to the ship's library and a set of hatches that led toward the engineering spaces. It was not in any of the official tour stops Farr had mapped for her. She found it the way she had known she would find it, by knowing where to look, by understanding how carriers position these things, by 5 years of carrying its location in her memory, like a stone in a pocket that you stop noticing until you reach in and find it again. Farr had stepped away to manage a crew matter. Clara was momentarily alone in the corridor. She stopped. The wall was brass and steel. Names in ordered rows, each one with a date and a classification designation. Most of the entries bore full details. Theater of action, mission type. Some of the older ones had been updated as records were declassified. The original sparse entries expanded over time as the reasons behind them became safe to acknowledge. She did not read it from the top. She went directly to where she knew she was going, the way you go directly to a page you have memorized without intending to. Lieutenant Marcus Vane. The name sat in the third row from the bottom on the right panel. The date beside it was 5 years and 3 months ago. Below the date, in the standardized font of official records, a designation that the Navy uses when the full truth of a thing cannot be publicly committed to metal cause classified. Clara stood in front of it for a long time. The corridor was empty. The ventilation moved the air in its slow, mechanical rhythm. Somewhere deep in the ship, a hatch opened and closed. She did not touch the wall. She stood with her arms at her sides and her helmet tucked under her left arm, the name M. Vane pressed against her ribs where the lining rested against her flight suit. She had known this moment was coming. She had been building toward it deliberately for 96 hours. She had thought in the way that people think about difficult things at a distance, that she had prepared for it adequately. That preparation was a form of armor. She discovered now that it was not. "You knew him, ma'am?" The voice came from behind her, quiet and without edge, in the way of a man who understood the difference between a question and a statement and had chosen the latter deliberately. She had heard Chief Tate's footsteps approaching, but she had not turned. She turned now. He was standing at a respectful distance, wearing the specific expression of someone who has stood in front of this wall himself and knows what it asks of you. "He flew my wing," Clara said. Tate nodded. He did not ask anything else. He had been in the Navy long enough to know that some answers are complete when they are simple, and that pressing further is a way of taking something that belongs to someone else. They stood there together for a moment in the corridor, in the kind of shared silence that requires neither explanation nor apology. Then Clara said, "How long have you been on the Sentinel?" 3 years, ma'am, this tour. And before that, Nimitz, Eisenhower, a stint at Lemoore between deployments." He paused. "I was at Lemoore during your last active assignment." "I remember the landing," she said. "So do I," he said. "So does every maintenance tech who was on deck that morning." He said it without theater, just as a fact. The kind of fact that has been carried for years and set down once in the right company. Clara looked back at the wall for a moment. Then she adjusted the helmet under her arm and turned back toward the passageway. "Thank you, Chief." "Welcome back, ma'am," he said. "We're glad you're here." She walked back toward the tour route. Her free hand at her side was closed into a fist. Not in anger, in the particular grip of someone holding something they have carried a long time and are not yet ready to set down. The audit took the better part of 2 days. Clara moved through the Sentinel's departments with the methodical patience of someone who has done this before and understands that rushing produces the same result as not doing it at all. She reviewed the intercept protocols. She assessed the radar integration systems. She evaluated the communication routing, the threat response matrices, the pilot readiness records, the maintenance logs that told the real story of a ship's operational health in the accumulated language of parts replaced and hours logged and problems caught before they became catastrophes. The systems were good, more than good. They were in several specific areas the best she had evaluated in 7 years of informal and formal assessments. She noted this without satisfaction because satisfaction was not the emotion it produced in her. What it produced was something quieter and more complicated, something in the range of what you feel when you find out that a thing you did in private without expectation of recognition turned out to matter. Admiral Slade walked with her through several of the assessments. He did not crowd her work. He answered her questions directly and completely, and he did not attempt to manage her conclusions, which she appreciated more than the directness. On the second afternoon, standing in the Combat Information Center, she looked up from a display. The communications routing, the alert path reduction, who built the current architecture? Slade looked at the display. It was a collective effort, over about 3 years. Based on what source framework? A pause. A recommendations memo, written during a simulation debrief about 7 years ago. How did you get it? The memo was informal. I never submitted it through official channels. No, he said, but you gave it to someone who gave it to someone who gave it to me. He let that sit for a moment. It took 4 years to get the funding authorized, but we got there. Clara turned back to the display. She did not say anything. Slade said quietly, "This ship runs on ideas that have your fingerprints on them, Commander. Every department you've walked through today, most of what you've assessed as strong." He paused. "That's not an accident, and it's not nothing." Clara made a note in her field notebook. Her handwriting was small and even. "No," she said, "it's not nothing." She signed the audit report that evening. Her right hand resting on the terminal edge afterward held a stillness that cost her something. 2 years ago, it had not cost anything. The cost was rising slowly the way all honest debts rise when you have been deferring them long enough. She knew what it meant. She had always known what it meant. She had simply not yet found the right conditions for the reckoning. She closed the terminal, stood up, and went to find Admiral Slade. The hangar bay was quiet after 2100. The day shift crews had rotated out, the aircraft settled into their overnight configurations, and the massive space had taken on the specific piece of a working place at rest. Overhead lights ran at reduced power, casting long shadows between the parked jets. Slade found her standing near the port side, looking out through one of the bay doors at the dark water. He pulled two metal folding chairs from a stack against the bulkhead, set them facing the open door, and sat in one. After a moment, Clara sat in the other. Outside, the carrier moved through the Pacific without hurry. 3,000 feet below the keel, the ocean went on in all directions without requiring anything of anyone. "I didn't tell them you were coming," Slade said finally. He said it without preface, picking up the middle of a conversation they hadn't officially started. Clara looked at the dark water. "I know. Not far, not the air boss, not the crew." He rested his forearms on his knees. "I needed the response to be real. I've watched too many drills produce perfect results that vanish the moment it's actual. I needed to know whether this fleet would recognize authority it couldn't see on a roster. Whether they'd hear it when it came." "Sure," Clara said. "And you heard the deck when you landed." She had. She had heard the particular sound a ship makes when 3,000 people are paying attention to the same thing at the same time, when collective awareness focuses like light through a lens. She had heard it, and she had not allowed herself to look at it directly, because looking at it directly would have required her to feel something she was not ready to feel in front of anyone. "It wasn't for me," she said. "Some of it was for the legend. I know that. Legends do work, but the legend is built from the actual, from the things you actually did. You don't get to separate them and keep only the uncomfortable half." Clara did not answer. Slade looked at the water. "Marcus would have been proud of this ship," he said. He said it plainly, without embellishment, the way you say the name of someone who has been dead long enough that saying the name is no longer an act of ceremony, but just an act of accuracy. The name hit Clara the way it always hit her. Not with shock, because shock requires surprise, with the specific impact of a thing you are always braced for and are still never quite ready for. She did not speak for a long moment. "He would have found something to complain about," she said. Slade made a sound that was almost a laugh. "He would have. The comms routing in Section 4, the redundancy overlap. He would have been on that for a week." "He was thorough," Slade said. "He was relentless," Clara said. "There's a difference." And for a moment, in the quiet of the hangar bay, with the dark water moving outside, something eased in her. Not resolved, not finished, just eased the way a long-held muscle releases, not because the work is done, but because it has been held long enough that the body negotiates a temporary mercy. She had not spoken about Marcus with anyone, not in 5 years, not in a way that allowed him to be a person rather than a classified designation. She had spoken around him. She had carried his name on her helmet, in his absence in her chest, and she had not spoken about him. She looked at the water. She let the moment be what it was. Slade stood eventually and picked up his chair. He looked at her for a moment in the reduced light. "Whatever you came here to finish," he said, "take the time it needs." He set the chair back against the bulkhead. "That's not a statement about the audit timeline. The audit timeline is the audit timeline." He paused. "I mean the other thing." He walked back toward the island and left her with the water and the open door and the dark. The next morning came in clear and hard, the Pacific light without mercy, the kind of morning that strips away everything soft and leaves only the actual shape of things. Clara had slept for 4 hours on a bunk in the guest officer quarters, which was 3 more hours than she had slept the night before she flew in. She was standing near the forward elevator, watching a maintenance crew work through a pre-flight inspection on one of the Raptors when she heard footsteps behind her and knew from their pace and weight that it was Declan Marsh. He had been working up to this for a day. She had watched him in the peripheral way she watched everything, trying to find the angle of approach to a conversation he had decided he needed to have, but hadn't yet determined how to start. She had not made it easier for him. It was not unkindness. It was the understanding that some conversations need to find their own way to the surface. He stopped a few feet away, stood beside her watching the maintenance crew. He was quiet for a moment in the way of someone organizing what they intend to say. "Ma'am," he said, "my Top Gun instructor is Commander Elliot Vane." Clara kept her eyes on the maintenance crew. She did not respond immediately. "He doesn't talk much about his brother," Declan said. "In my whole time at Top Gun, he mentioned him twice. Both times indirectly." He paused. "But once after a night debrief. Late. Room was mostly clear. He said that someone had gotten his brother out of the cockpit before the fire. He never found out who. He said he'd stopped trying to find out because the records didn't exist and the people who knew weren't talking. And at some point, you have to make peace with not knowing." He stopped, looked at the Raptor. He said it like it was something he'd worked on for a long time. Like it was still work. Clara was quiet. "How is he?" she said finally. Her voice was level. She had made it level. "Good, ma'am," Declan said. "He's the best instructor I've trained under. Demanding. Specific. He doesn't give you the answer. He teaches you how to find it. He has a way of making you feel like getting it right matters for reasons beyond the exercise." Clara nodded once. She understood exactly why Elliot Vane taught that way. She had flown beside his brother. She knew what the alternative to getting it right looked like. "Was it you?" Declan asked. The question was direct, no evasion in it. She looked at him for the first time in the conversation fully the way she looked at instruments when she needed to know exactly what they were reading. He met her eyes without flinching. He was, she thought, better than she had initially assessed, and she had initially assessed him as very good. "Yes," she said. Declan absorbed this. His expression did not change dramatically, but something shifted beneath the surface of it, the way a landscape changes when the light changes, the same features suddenly carrying different weight. "He doesn't know," he said. "No." "Does he know you're here?" "He knows my name," Clara said. "He knows the call sign. He doesn't know the connection." Declan looked back at the Raptor. The maintenance crew had moved to the starboard engine, housing their voices low and professional in the morning air. "There's something else," Declan said. He said it carefully in the way of someone who has decided to commit to a thing they've been holding back. "My father served, Marines. He was part of a recovery operation about 5 years ago. 12 men extracted from a situation that he has never described to me in any detail. He doesn't talk about it." He paused. "He did say one thing, once, when I told him I was going to flight school. He said there is a kind of pilot that exists outside of what you'll learn in training, outside of what you'll read about. He said he'd encountered one once in the worst situation he'd been in, and that he was alive because of it." A pause. "He didn't say a name. He never said a name, but he said it was a woman." The morning light was sharp across the deck. Clara said nothing for a moment. She was looking at the Raptor. Looking at the precise geometry of it, the engineering solution of it, the way something designed for speed and violence could also be in the right hands a tool for something else entirely. "Your father served well," she said finally. Declan looked at her. She was still looking at the Raptor. "Is that—" He stopped, started again. "Ma'am, is that a confirmation?" "It's a statement about your father," she said, "which is true regardless of anything else." He held the non-answer for a moment. He was smart enough to hear what it contained. He was smart enough, she noted, not to push past the edge of what she was willing to give in this moment, in this place, without more time and the right conditions. That was good. That was the kind of judgment that kept pilots alive on days when the flight parameters changed faster than the briefing had predicted. "He taught me about duty," Declan said quietly, "not as a concept, as a practice. He said it was the difference between the people who lasted and the people who didn't." He paused. "I think I understand it better now than I did before this morning." Clara turned to face him fully. She looked at him the way she had looked at Marcus once, the first time she had understood that Marcus was going to be someone worth flying beside, someone whose instincts and hers could braid together into something functional and safe. The assessment was not sentimental. It was professional and it was thorough, and what it returned was unambiguous. You ran a clean intercept yesterday, she said, under full protocol, with weapons live and authority clear. You adjusted to new orders in under 10 seconds without losing formation. She paused. I've assessed intercept flights at every major carrier group in the Pacific over the past 4 years. What you and Callum ran yesterday morning was in the top 3. Declan said nothing. Your instructor, she said, is doing the work he needs to do. She said it knowing he would understand the layers in it, that she meant Elliot Vane was producing excellent pilots, and that she meant Elliot Vane had found a way to build something from a loss that should have been purely destructive, and that she meant the work of carrying loss and continuing to function was not the absence of grief but the presence of something alongside it. Declan nodded, the small certain nod of someone who has received something they intend to keep. He looked at her for a moment. Then, with the instinct of a man who knows when a conversation has reached the right ending, he said, "Thank you, ma'am." He turned and walked back toward the island, and Clara watched him go. The morning light came hard and clear across the deck, and below the keel the water moved, and the ship carried within it everything that had ever happened on its steel and everything that was still to come. She reached up and adjusted the helmet under her arm, felt the weight of it, felt the name pressed against her ribs. She stood there for a moment in the morning light alone on the deck with the ocean all around her and the ship beneath her feet and the knowledge sitting quiet and complete in her chest that the conversation she had just had with Declan Marsh was not the end of something. It was the last thing before the beginning of the end. The audit report took Clara 3 hours to write. She sat in the guest officer quarters with her field notebook open beside the terminal, transferring handwritten observations into the formal language of official assessment, the compression of 2 days of movement and attention into the structured architecture of institutional record. She worked without pause. The prose of evaluation came easily to her, had always come easily because she understood that the purpose of a formal report was not to contain everything that had been observed, but to convey with precision and economy the things that the people who read it needed to know in order to make the decisions that were theirs to make. Everything else was for a different kind of record kept in a different kind of place. The Sentinel systems were rated at the highest tier across all assessed categories: intercept protocols, radar integration, threat response architecture, pilot readiness. The comments section, which most auditors use sparingly, she used to note specific structural innovations she recommended for fleet-wide adoption. The communications routing modification. The adaptive approach vector parameters now built into the standard intercept training sequence. 3 others. She did not note their origin. It was not relevant to the report's function. She signed the bottom of the final page, set the pen down, looked at the completed document on the screen. The official work was done. She closed the notebook and went to find Admiral Slade for the last time. He was in his at-sea cabin, a space of functional austerity that told you everything you needed to know about the man who inhabited it. A desk, a bunk, one frame photograph facing the bulkhead turned so its subject was private. Charts on the fold-down table. A coffee maker that looked like it had been in continuous operation since the previous decade. He poured her a cup without asking. She took it. They sat at the fold-down table, the charts pushed to one side. The ship moved beneath them. The afternoon light came through the small porthole at a low angle. "The report is filed," she said. "I saw it come through." He wrapped both hands around his own cup. Highest tier across every category. "It earned it." "I know." He looked at his cup. "Thank you for saying it plainly." A silence settled between them, comfortable in the way of people who have already said the harder things. The coffee maker clicked and settled. Somewhere outside, a flight deck evolution was underway, its sounds moving through the ship's steel in the muffled, attenuated way that everything moves through a carrier's structure. Clara set her cup down. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked up at Slade with the expression of someone who has been carrying a weight for a long time and has arrived at the place where putting it down is the only remaining option. "I need to tell you something about Marcus," she said. Slade was still. He had been still in the way of someone who has been waiting for a door to open. "What he did in the last 3 days," she said. "What actually happened. Not the classified designation on the wall." She paused. "The actual thing." "Clara," he said carefully, "you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. That's not the reason I'm doing it." He waited. She looked at the porthole, at the thin strip of ocean visible through it. "We pulled him out of the aircraft," she said. "The aircraft was on fire. We were in a location that does not appear in any official record of U.S. military presence, which is why the designation on the wall says what it says. We got him out. He was alive." She stopped for a moment, not for effect, for the functional reason that the next part required a different kind of breath. There was a field hospital, 8 minutes by air, not on any map that the public has ever seen, and not on most maps that the military has seen. He was there for 3 days. Slade said nothing. I was there for 3 days, Clara said. The mission was still active. Operationally, I was not supposed to be there. I was supposed to be somewhere else, doing something else, and the fact that I was not was a deviation from mission parameters that I made unilaterally and have never formally reported. She paused. No one has ever asked. The ship moved. The light through the porthole shifted by a small degree. He was conscious for most of the first 2 days, she said. He was in pain, but he was conscious, and he was in the way that Marcus was almost intolerably himself. He complained about the field hospital's coffee. He ran through checklist procedures out loud when he was having trouble sleeping, like a prayer in a language that only made sense at altitude. She stopped, looked at her cup again. On the 3rd day, he asked about Elliot. Slade closed his eyes briefly. He asked if Elliot knew, she said. I told him Elliot was fine, that Elliot was at Top Gun, that the students there were going to have a difficult year because of him. She paused again. I don't know if Marcus knew what I wasn't saying. I think he probably did. He was not a man who missed the shape of a silence. She looked at the porthole. He said, tell him I was good at the joke. That was what he said. Tell him I was good at the joke. And then he asked me to take his helmet. The cabin was very quiet. Elliot doesn't know any of this, she said. He knows his brother didn't come back. He knows the records are classified. He has spent 5 years in a version of not knowing that is worse than the actual truth, because the actual truth contains the specific things I just told you, and those specific things are different from a mission designation on a wall. Slade looked at her for a long time. His face was doing the careful work of a man holding several significant things simultaneously. Why now, he said finally. Because I found out that Elliot Vane trained Declan Marsh, she said. And I found out that Declan Marsh's father was in the group we extracted that day. She paused. Everything I have been carrying has a person attached to it who is still walking around without the full weight of it. That was never sustainable. She looked at Slade. I was waiting for the right conditions. These are the closest I've been in 5 years. And Elliot, he gets it from someone who will carry it to him directly, she said. Not a declassified file, not a bureaucratic summary, a human being at his door with the words that need to be said. She paused. I'll write it down so nothing is lost in the carrying, but the paper is not the point. The person who delivers it is. Slade looked at her. You already know who. Yes, she said. I've known since yesterday morning. A long silence. Slade nodded once. The nod of a man who has understood something and agreed to something and accepted the weight of both without requiring further elaboration. Marcus was good at the job, he said quietly. He was the best I flew beside, Clara said, and I've flown beside the best. She picked up her cup. The coffee had gone cold. She drank it anyway. The situation arose at 0540 the following morning. It came through the CIC on a channel that had been quiet for 2 weeks, a contact profile that the threat assessment matrix flagged immediately and correctly. Not a fleet-level engagement. A single-point aerial threat origin uncertain track consistent with a reconnaissance pattern over the carrier group's eastern perimeter. The kind of thing that gets resolved in 20 minutes if the right assets are in the air inside the first 10. Clara was in the hangar bay when the alarm sounded. She heard it and moved toward the L-39 the way she always moved toward an aircraft when the call came with the particular quality of motion that years of scramble responses build into a pilot's body at the cellular level. Not thought, just movement, the body already doing what it knows how to do. She climbed the ladder, settled into the seat. Her hands found the startup sequence from muscle memory, the L-39's familiar instrument layout speaking to her in the language of accumulated hours. Outside the deck was coming alive, day shift crew responding to the alert. Raptors being positioned for launch. She reached for the throttle and stopped. It was not a decision. It arrived as information the way pain that has been managed for a long time eventually arrives not as a message you can choose to ignore, but as a statement of fact. Her right hand on the throttle was not steady. The tremor was small. To anyone watching from outside, it would have been invisible, but she felt it. She had been feeling its early forms for 2 years, managing it with the specific mental negotiation that pilots perform with their own limitations. The negotiation that says, this is manageable, this is within tolerance, this is not the thing that stops me today. Today, it was the thing that stopped her, not the tremor itself, what it represented. She knew with the clarity that comes when you finally stop arguing with In fact, what would happen in a sustained high-G engagement with her right hand unreliable under pressure. She knew it precisely, and what she knew was that she was not the right asset for this mission, and that putting herself into the air this morning would be the act of someone choosing pride over outcome. Marcus had once said to her in the specific way he had of saying things that sounded casual until you thought about them, the hardest call in the air isn't the one you make when you don't have enough information. It's the one you make when you have exactly enough. She had exactly enough. She sat in the cockpit for a moment, both hands on the controls, the engine warm and ready. The deck outside organized and purposeful and waiting. Then she climbed down. She walked across the hangar bay at a pace that did not broadcast urgency. She was not running from something. She was moving toward the next right thing with the particular economy of motion that comes when you have stopped wasting energy on resistance. Declan was at the flight deck briefing station pulling his gear on, running through the situation summary with Callum and the three other pilots in the scramble rotation. He looked up when she approached. His face asked the question before he did. "You're leading this flight," she said. He looked at her directly the way she had looked at him on the deck 2 days ago, the full attention of someone who understands that the moment they are in requires their complete presence. "Ma'am, your threat profile is a single reconnaissance asset, likely unmanned given the pattern, but treated as manned until confirmed otherwise. Your intercept window is 7 minutes from wheels up before it exits the eastern perimeter boundary." She paused. "You know the approach protocols. You helped test them yesterday morning that without knowing that's what you were doing." Declan held her gaze. He was processing multiple things simultaneously and doing it quickly. "What's the asset disposition if it's manned?" he asked. "Standard intercept. Escort to the perimeter. You have authorization to issue a warning shot if it does not respond to 3 hails. You do not have authorization for a kill shot without direct flag approval. And flag approval comes from Admiral Slade is in the CIC. He'll be on your channel." Declan nodded. Then he said quietly, separate from the operational exchange they had just conducted. "Are you all right?" Clara looked at him. There was a version of the answer to that question that she had given in different forms for 5 years. It was a functional answer. It served its purpose. She did not give it now. "I have something for you," she said, "after the flight." Something in his face settled. He heard the weight in it, and he did not press it. He turned back to his crew, his voice shifting into the register of command, clean and certain, and carrying the specific authority of someone who has been told in no uncertain terms that the moment is his. "Callum, Holt, Bridger, on me. We're wheels up in 4. Clara stepped back. She watched the crew move with the efficient energy of people who know what they are doing and trust each other to do it. Watched Declan at the center of it, the way he held the space without crowding it, the way authority that is real does not need to announce itself, but simply organizes what is around it. She recognized it. She had seen it from the other side for a long time. She walked to the edge of the deck and watched the Raptors launch. They were gone for 19 minutes. Clara stood at the flight deck observation position for all of it. She tracked the mission on her personal comms unit, listening to the channel without transmitting, hearing Declan run the intercept with the precision she had expected and the adaptability she had hoped for. The contact was unmanned, a reconnaissance drone running a slow surveillance loop on the carrier group's eastern boundary. Declan identified it correctly inside 90 seconds of visual contact, called it accurately to Slade, received authorization for standard protocol, ran the intercept clean. The drone denied its surveillance window, altered course, and departed the operational area without incident. No warning shot required, no escalation. The kind of outcome that looks unremarkable in the after-action report and represents in reality exactly what a well-trained crew operating under a well-calibrated command structure is supposed to produce. The Raptors came back in formation low and level over the carrier's port side before breaking into the landing pattern one by one. Declan came in last. His approach was textbook in the way that only genuine competence produces. Not the textbook of someone performing for an audience. The textbook of someone for whom the correct method has become the natural method because they have practiced it until the two are indistinguishable. He was pulling off his helmet when he saw her across the deck. He walked over directly without the hesitation that had characterized his approach 2 days ago. Whatever had been uncertain in him then had resolved into something cleaner. "Clean intercept," she said. "Drone as you suspected, single asset, no escalation. Your timing on the identification call was good. You didn't rush it, and you didn't wait past the window." "I had a good morning," he said. Then after a pause, "You said you had something for me." Clara reached into the interior pocket of her flight suit and removed a small envelope. Plain white. She had written an address on the back in the same small, careful handwriting that had written Hisham Vane inside a helmet lining many years ago. She held it out. He took it. Commander Elliot Vane's home address, she said. He's between assignments. He'll be there for the next 3 weeks. Declan looked at the envelope without opening it. What's inside? He asked. A letter, she said. Everything Elliot deserves to know written down so nothing is lost in the carrying. It says his brother was pulled from the aircraft before the fire, that he was alive for 3 days, that he was not alone for those 3 days. She paused. It says the last thing Marcus asked about was Elliot, and it says what Marcus asked her to tell him the specific words because those words belong to Elliot and they have waited long enough. She paused again. It says that the people his brother helped shape the pilots who carry his methods without knowing his name are among the best she has seen in 20 years of assessment. Declan was very still. The letter is the record, she said, but you are the reason it reaches him. You're the bridge between his brother's generation and yours. That's not a metaphor. It's a functional description of what you actually are. Declan looked at the envelope. He turned it over in his hands once. Then he held it with both hands, not loosely, with the specific grip of someone who understands that what they are holding is not the paper, but what the paper carries. What do I say to him, he asked, when I hand it to him? What do I say with my own words? Clara thought about it. She thought about Elliot Vane, whom she had not seen in 5 years, who had spent those years building excellent pilots from the particular combination of his brother's loss in his own discipline and the specific faith of a person who continues to do the work because the work was the last thing that connected them. Tell him his brother didn't die in the mission log, she said. Tell him his brother died in a room with someone who had flown beside him for 2 years, who knew how he took his coffee and what he said when he was working through a difficult problem and what his voice sounded like when he was thinking about home. Tell him the record is classified, but the truth isn't. Declan nodded. The small, certain nod. He folded the envelope carefully and put it inside his flight suit. Callum had been standing at a respectful distance. He walked over now, and the three of them stood on the deck in the morning light, and the Sentinel moved beneath them with its steady carrier's purpose. Are you leaving today? Declan asked. This morning, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, I'm going to tell my father about the extraction. I think he deserves to know who it was. That's your call to make, she said. Yes, he said. I know. She extended her hand. He shook it, and it was not the handshake of deference, not the handshake of a junior officer to a superior, but the handshake of two people who have exchanged something real and are acknowledging it without ceremony. She shook Callum's hand too. He said, It was an honor, ma'am. He meant it without performance or decoration, the simple statement of a man who says exactly what he means. Clara turned and walked toward the island. She took the long route. The corridor between the library and the engineering hatches was empty at this hour. The overhead lights ran at their steady fluorescent patience. The memorial wall stood in its brass and steel, carrying its names in the particular silence of things made to outlast the people who made them. She stopped in front of it, looked at the names she had been looking at in one form or another for 5 years. She took the permanent marker from the inner pocket of her flight suit, the same kind Marcus had used years ago on a flight line that no longer existed. She uncapped it. She wrote 4 words in the space beside the classified designation. Small letters. Careful. The kind you write when you want something to last. Not forever, not here, not forgotten. She capped the marker, put it back in her pocket, and walked toward the flight deck without looking back. The aircraft was prepped. She had arranged it with the deck crew at 0430, before the alert, before everything that had followed the alert. The L-39 sat in its position with the patient readiness of something that has been doing this for a long time and expects to continue. Captain Farr was there. Chief Tate stood slightly behind him with 4 younger sailors that Clara recognized from the memorial corridor days ago. Farr's face carried the particular expression of a commanding officer who has been asked to accept things he cannot fully account for and has decided to accept them anyway. Commander Mathis, Farr said. Safe travels. Thank you for the ship, Captain, she said. It's a good one. I know, he said with the straightforward pride of a man who has poured years of his life into a thing and watched it become worthy of that investment. Clara turned to Tate. The chief looked at her with the direct and uncomplicated gaze of a man who has organized a great deal of living into something functional. He said, Come back when you can, ma'am. The door's open. Thank you, Chief. She looked at the younger sailors behind him. They were watching her with the specific attention of people who understand they are in the presence of something that will be significant later in retrospect when they have enough context to know what they saw. She did not give a speech. She simply looked at them, each one for a moment, the way she looked at things she intended to remember. Then she climbed the ladder. In the cockpit, she ran through the startup sequence. The instruments came alive in their ordered way. Green, green, green. The engine woke with its familiar low complaint and settled into its working rhythm. She reached for the helmet on the seat beside her, picked it up. The name inside the lining had faded over 5 years from black to the gray of something carried a long time without ceremony. She did not read it. She did not need to. She knew it the way you know the weight of a thing you have held every day for years, not by looking but by the specific pressure of it in your hands. She had delivered the truth this morning, into the hands of the person who could carry it the rest of the way. She put the helmet on, adjusted it once. That was enough. She taxied to the catapult position. The launch crew moved around the aircraft with practiced efficiency. The flight deck spread out in every direction, the full length and width of it visible the island structure, to the right, the ocean opening out ahead. At the edge of her peripheral vision, she could see figures at the deck railing. Far, Tate and the young sailors. And further back near the forward elevator, two figures she recognized by their flight suits and their bearing. Declan Marsh and Bryce Callum standing together watching. She did not look at them directly, she looked ahead. The catapult officer ran through the signals. Clara ran through her final checks. Green, green, green. The engine came to full power, the airframe vibrating with the contained energy of something about to be released. She thought about the memorial wall on the second deck, the name in its brass row, the 4 words written beside the classified designation. She thought about the letter in Declan's flight suit on its way to a house in a city where a man spent his days building the next generation of people who would do this work not knowing that the person he was most trying to honor had asked in his last hours for the news of exactly this. The catapult officer gave the signal. Clara released the brakes. The Pacific reached up to meet her. The L-39 climbed hard off the deck and banked west, trading the carrier's shadow for open air, the ocean dropping away below as altitude replaced surface. Clara pulled back the nose and let the aircraft find its angle, the morning spreading itself across the horizon in all directions. She flew west for 2 minutes, climbing steady, letting the aircraft in the air negotiate the terms of the morning. The Pacific at altitude is not the same thing as the Pacific from the deck. From the deck, it is large. From altitude, it is what it actually is, which is that it goes on until it meets the sky and the sky goes on from there. Then she banked gently into a long arc that brought the Sentinel back into view below and to her right. The ship was small from here, as ships always are from altitude. The massive structure of it reduced by distance to something precise and geometric, a thing made to a purpose, moving through an element it had adapted to inhabit. She looked at it for a moment, the full length of it. The flight deck, the island, the white line of its wake cut into the dark water. 3,000 people in the metal and steel of it running the systems, keeping the ship alive, doing the 10,000 ordinary things that a warship requires to remain a warship. She thought about what Slade had said in the hangar bay. This ship runs on ideas that have your fingerprints on them. She had not known how to receive that when he said it. She had filed a note and moved on, which was her default response to things that required more processing than the immediate moment allowed. But up here, with the ship below her and the ocean all around and nowhere to be in the next few hours except in the air, she received it fully. The fingerprints were on the systems. The systems were running the ship. The ship was carrying 3,000 people through the most complex operational environment on the surface of the Earth and doing it well, and the quality of the doing was in some unmappable but real way connected to ideas she had written on yellow paper in the margins of debriefs and believed were disappearing into the institutional void. They had not disappeared. Marcus had not disappeared in the specific sense that mattered. He was in Elliot Vane, who was in Declan Marsh, who was in every pilot Declan Marsh would train or fly beside or lead in the years ahead. He was in the work. The work did not require his name to be spoken. The work did not require the record to be declassified. The work carried him the way all work carries the people who shaped it invisibly in the quality of the thing itself. She had carried his name in a helmet. The fleet carried his method in its bones. Both were true. Neither was sufficient without the other. She leveled out at altitude, set her heading, opened the throttle to cruise and let the ocean unspool beneath her, the horizon clean and clear in every direction. Somewhere below her on the deck of the Sentinel, Declan Marsh was standing with Bryce Callum, watching the albatross become a point and then a line, and then a quality of light against the morning. Callum said quietly, "She's not coming back, is she?" It was not a question. He said it the way you say something when you already know the answer but need to hear it in the air. Declan watched the last trace of the aircraft dissolve into the morning sky. "She was never really gone," he said. Callum considered this. He nodded once in the way of a man who has been given an answer that is true enough to hold. They stood on the deck for another moment. Then they turned and walked back toward the island, back toward the work carrying the morning with them. In the corridor between the ship's library and the engineering hatches, the memorial wall stood in its brass and steel in the quiet of the mid-morning ship. The overhead lights held the corridor in their steady patience. Somewhere deep in the ship, an alarm tested and cleared. Somewhere above the flight deck, evolution resumed its daily rhythm. The name M. Vane sat in its row. The date, the designation, cause classified. Beside it in handwriting that was small and careful, 4 words that had not been there before. Not forgotten. No one who passed through the corridor that morning could say when it had appeared. No one on the ship would claim to have written it. The investigation that Captain Farr half-heartedly initiated the following week would produce no conclusion because the corridor's foot traffic was continuous and the handwriting matched no sample in any database he had access to, and because some things Farr eventually decided were better accounted for by leaving them where they were. The wall kept its names, the ship kept its course, and the frequency, as it always had, kept transmitting. Not from any transmitter you could locate, not on any band you could tune to. From the work itself, from the systems and the protocols and the approach vectors and the 10,000 invisible decisions that kept the ship alive and the people in it capable of the thing they were there to do. Some pilots need clearance from the tower. Others are the clearance. And the ones who understand the difference are the ones who, long after their last landing, are still teaching it to everyone who comes after them. The sky does not forget. It simply waits for the next frequency to rise.